Assalamu everyone. Jazakallah to the organizers for this very humbling opportunity. And I'm going to start my timer, so stay on time. So before I get into my presentation, I'll give you guys a quick summary of the talk and what exactly I'm going to present today. So Hazrat Masih Maud, in his book Jesus in India, laid out the claim that Hazrat Isa, after escaping crucifixion, was moved east in search of the lost tribes of Israel. And as part of his book, he gave various sources of evidence from Islamic sources, Buddhist sources, Christian sources, as well as historical sources as well. Now, in the past 20 years, we have an additional source of information, which is essentially our genetic information, that we can add as an additional layer of evidence to Hazrat Masih Maud's claims. So just want to clarify that any claim that is made has to be substantiated from orthogonal sources of evidence, right? So it's not going to be that genetics alone will prove that Hazrat Isa and the lost tribes of Israel moved east. It will be a combination of various sources, archaeological, historical, and genetic, all coming together to piece together a complete narrative. So today what I'll be presenting is basically information from the genetic angle. The other thing I want to clarify as well is this is not research that I have done, but rather this is research that other people have done and that have been published already. So nobody has directly asked this question that did the lost tribes of Israel move east? So nobody has directly answered that, asked that question, but people have asked questions that are adjacent to this, and they have done surveys and populations which are relevant to our question. So I'll be presenting some of those initial findings, and then I'll also be showing you guys what are some of the open questions that need to be addressed and where active research needs to be done. So with that, I'll dive straight into the talk. So as I mentioned, in Jesus in India, Hazrat Masih Maud laid out that Hazrat Isa traveled through Persia, Afghanistan, Punjab, and ultimately to Kashmir, where he passed away. This is mentioned in the Quran as well, in the verse from Surah Al-Mu'minun, where Allah Ta'ala says, "And we made the son of Mary and his mother a sign, and gave them refuge on an elevated land of green valleys and springs of running water." And you can see from the cover of the book as well that that's an apt description of Kashmir. And the reason Hazrat Isa alayhi salam traveled east was to search for the lost tribes of Israel. Now, the lost tribes of Israel are also mentioned in the Bible as well. In particular, in the Bible of John, it's written down, "And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." So for Hazrat Isa to complete his mission as the prophet that was sent to Bani Israel, he not only had to preach to the Israelites that were present in where modern-day Palestine, Israel is, but also to those lost tribes that had left earlier as well. And this is mentioned in other biblical references as well, such as Matthew as well. So who were the lost tribes of Israel? So to answer this question, we'll dive a little deeper into biblical history. So there were 12 Israeli tribes, which together formed the kingdom of Israel and Judea. In 920 BCE, these two kingdoms, these tribes divided into essentially two kingdoms. 10 tribes to the north in Samaria, where the capital was Samaria, and that was the kingdom of Israel, and then southern Judah, where there were 2 or 3 tribes over there. In 722 BCE, and these dates are important to remember for the remainder of the talk, the Assyrian Empire took over northern Samaria, and this resulted in the first expulsion of the Israelites from that region. There were likely 3 scenarios at this point, although we don't have too many historical documents from that time, but likely there were 3 scenarios. Like a lot of them would have been killed. Some of them would have sought refuge in the southern kingdom of Judah, and some of them would have left elsewhere. The next conquest at the time of for Israel was in 586 BCE, about 200 years later, where the Babylonians, a separate empire from the Assyrians, and their king Nebuchadnezzar, took over Jerusalem. So in this case, they also took over the southern empire as well. And this started what was the 50-year exile. So at this time, a lot of the clergy was exiled, and they were sent to Babylon as prisoners towards the east. In 532 BCE, the Babylonian Empire was defeated by the Persians. The Persians were a lot more welcoming to the Jewish populations, and they asked them to begin coming back to Jerusalem to repopulate. And at that time, some of the tribes came back. However, not all of the tribes came back. In fact, a large majority of them probably did not come back. So in this talk, I'll be referring to those Jewish individuals who left Israel between 2,500 to 2,700 years ago as the lost tribes of Israel. Those Israelites who left within this time frame and did not return. All right, so coming back to the book, Jesus in India. As I mentioned, the Promised Messiah laid out various sources of evidence from various sources. I'll be pointing towards one, for this particular talk, I'll be highlighting one paper from one anthropology paper that was published in 1898 that is quoted in the book Jesus in India. And that paper states that the Pathans may be divided into two communities, those of Indian origin and those of Semitic origin. And it is difficult to account for the prevalence of Israelite names and certain rituals, such as the observance of Passover, amongst these Afghan communities, without admitting that there is some early connection with the Israelite nation. Thus, the Afghans may possibly be an Israelite absorbed into ancient Rajput tribes. Now, we've talked about who the lost tribes were, and we've also talked about an anthropology paper which suggests that it could be that there are certain Israelite tribes which got absorbed into the Afghan population. Now, in the era of population genetics, this is a question that we can actually go in and answer. So what exactly is the scientific question that we want to answer? If indeed the Israelites moved east and some of them settled in the Afghan region, we should see signatures of Jewish heritage in Afghan or Pathan individuals, i.e. we should be seeing genetic signatures of Jewish heritage in modern-day Afghans. That's the first question we want to answer. The second question, and this is a slightly nuanced part, but it's extremely important, is that the timelines need to match. That we should be able to show that those Israelites were present in that Afghan region 2,000 years ago when Hazrat Isa was there. So we have to show that the Israelites came, then Hazrat Isa came, not the other way around, because if Hazrat Isa came before the Israelites, the purpose of him coming would not work, right? So these are the essential two questions we would want to answer. So how do we first define Jewish heritage? So the people who have been most interested in defining what genetic Jewish heritage is are Jewish people themselves. So there have already been numerous studies highlighting that what exactly is a genetic Jewish heritage. And these studies have been conducted on the entire Jewish diaspora, including Ashkenazi Jewish, which are primarily European, Middle Eastern Jews, Ethiopian Jews, and even South Asian Jews as well. And the thing is that because Jews obviously have a certain marriage pattern where they're marrying within their community, that happening over over centuries gives them a distinct genetic signature which can be identified. There's nothing special about that genetic signature. It's just a simple, as simple as a genetic fingerprint, you would say. And the way that we identify these genetic signatures, and this is one of the two technical slides that I have, is through our chromosomal DNA. Now we have two sets of chromosomes in each and every single cell of our body. One comes from the father, one comes from the mother. As that is inherited through generations, large tracts of DNA from our ancestors are inherited together. Those large tracts of DNA are referred to as haplotypes. And in modern day individuals, we can see those large tracts of DNA and we can, as genetic signatures, and we can map back that these genetic signatures are most common in people of, for example, Jewish heritage, of people of South Asian heritage, of people of African heritage, et cetera, et cetera. That's how essentially we would create a genetic signature looking for common ancestors. Another way to look for genetic signatures is through the mitochondrial DNA. Now, the mitochondrial DNA is slightly different from the chromosomal DNA, which I mentioned in the previous slide. And the main difference is, so for the chromosomal DNA, we're getting one copy from the father, one copy from the mother. And we can track back the genetic signature that way. But the mitochondrial DNA is unique because 100% of our mitochondrial DNA comes from our mother, whose mitochondrial DNA came from their mother, and so on and so forth. And studies have actually been done that we can track back matrilinear lineages all the way back to the dawn of humanity. And this is particularly important for a community of, for the Jewish community, because historically, individual's Jewishness has essentially been coming from the mother. If somebody's mother is Jewish, they're automatically assumed to be Jewish as well. So particularly for the Jewish community, this tracking of matrilinear lineages is particularly important. And obviously, similar to chromosomal DNA, there have been various studies that have tracked the matrilinear lineages of Jewish individuals as well. And these studies have shown that there are a surprisingly small number of Jewish heritage lineages found in modern-day Jewish individuals. So when I say a Jewish heritage lineage, what exactly do I mean? It means that this is a mitochondrial lineage, i.e. tracked maternally, that is more prevalent in individuals of Jewish heritage as opposed to non-Jewish individuals. And it can be traced back to 2,000 to 2,500 years ago, i.e. it is relevant to Jewish history. So now at this point, we've talked about what a Jewish, a heritage signal is, and that is something that we can identify through modern genetics. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you results from a survey that was done in Pathan individuals back in 2016. This is a survey that is done in 100 individuals, only encompassing 4 tribes. Now, I want to emphasize that this is a very small sample size. In the realm of population genetics, where we're looking at entire populations, 100 is a very teeny tiny sample size. But despite that very small sample size, 7% of those individuals, particularly the Bangash and Khatak tribes, carried one particular Jewish heritage lineage, and that Jewish heritage lineage is called K1A, B1A. The name is not important to remember, but if somebody carries this and they go to Ancestry.com or they go to 23andMe, 23andMe will tell them that you have Jewish heritage, you have Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. So we can see that this is present at 7% in these particular tribes, and overall in South Asia, it is much less than 1%. And if we look at this particular lineage and its prevalence across the world, we see that it's carried in 20%, at a 20% prevalence in Ashkenazi Jewish individuals. In historical samples from a Jewish cemetery in Germany, dating back to 1400 AD, this matrilineal lineage was present at 40% prevalence. And then Bulgarian Jews, which are a combination of Ashkenazi as well as Middle Eastern Jews, and those individuals, it's present at 8.5%. So what do these results mean? These results point to initial evidence that the first question that we wanted to ask, that do individuals of Afghan origin, do they carry signatures of Jewish heritage? The answer is yes. However, this is obviously a very small sample size, and there is still more work that needs to be done for more further evaluation of this, for this link. Now, there's one important unanswered question. So at this point, what we've looked at is that, yes, Afghans do have Jewish heritage. But when did that Jewish heritage arrive in the region? That answer we do not have right now. And based off of the studies that have already been published, we cannot make that, we cannot make that inference as of today. But that is an area of research that we would have to work on, and we can work on given the right data set to answer that question relatively easy, because we have the tools and the methodologies to work on it. We just need the right data set. And to answer this, what we essentially need to do is jointly analyze modern Pathan individuals and Jewish individuals and see at what point do they have, how many years ago did their most recent ancestor come about. So essentially what we're looking at is like, we have a group of individuals who are the historical Jewish individuals, and then we have historical South Asian individuals. At some point, these two populations met, resulting in genetics what we refer to as an admixture event, i.e. the mixing of two populations. And that created what are the modern day Afghan populations. So what we would want, by jointly analyzing, we would answer two specific questions. Number one, the important timeline question, how many years ago did it happen? And number two, what is the percentage of the South Asian genetic signature in these individuals? And what is the percentage of the Jewish signature in these individuals? And my hypothesis essentially would be that for certain tribes, one would be higher, for certain tribes, the other would be higher. All right, so we've talked a fair bit of Afghans, but going back to Jesus in India, Hazrat Masih Maud said that he stayed in Afghanistan for a while, but then eventually went to Kashmir, where he eventually passed away. So is there any such link for Kashmiris? There hasn't been done any survey similar to the one that I showed you for Afghans, for Kashmiris, but there have been surveys done in generally the Pakistani population, which does answer our question. And also, one thing to note is Hazrat Masih Maud said that he went to Afghanistan via Punjab, right? So this is a study that was done in individuals of Pakistani descent living in Bradford, UK. And what that study basically showed was that the Pathans and Kashmiris are two very similar populations. And the Kashmiris carry genetic signatures from Pathans as well as Punjabis. Now, there are two ways we can interpret this data. Number one is the plot on the right, where at one point, Kashmiris and Pathans were one population, and they split out, probably because of geographical reasons. That's interpretation number one. Interpretation number two is that Kashmiris were essentially northern Punjabis, which at some point had admixture with Pathans. Irrespective of whichever interpretation we pick, for Hazrat Isa, who was in search of the lost tribes, it makes sense, like after Afghanistan, going towards Kashmir. And the fact that they do carry a Punjabi a Punjabi genetic signature as well, it makes sense to, for Hazrat Isa to travel to Kashmir via Punjab. So these results support the fact that it made sense for Hazrat Isa to go from Afghanistan towards Kashmir via Punjab. So what are some of the key takeaways that we have as far as now? So the first thing is that, yes, we do observe genetic markers of Jewish heritage in Pathan individuals. However, the exact time at when that admixture event happened, that is an unanswered question that we need to focus on. And secondly, a survey of a British Pakistani shows that there is significant gene flow from Pathans to Kashmiris, highlighting their similarity and making it plausible that Hazrat Isa indeed went from Afghanistan towards Kashmir. All right, how am I doing on time? Okay, I have 2 more minutes, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to change gears a bit. And now I've been talking about tracking the genetic signature of people residing in Northwest South Asia, essentially. But I'm going to change gears and show you guys another sort of analysis which can also answer some of our questions regarding Hazrat Isa's migration towards Kashmir. So one question that kind of comes up, and I've personally been asked this question relatively often, is it even possible for someone to go all the way from Jerusalem to Kashmir through all that? Like, this is 2,000 years ago. Did those, were those routes well-manned at those times? What was the exact route? So genetics, and there are various ways we can answer this, but genetics also gives you an answer to this. And that is through the analysis of genetic outliers. So here is a study that looked at a cemetery in northern Israel. And they dug up, through the excavation, they, they took out the remains of some of the graves, and they sequenced their genomes. By sequencing their genomes, what they saw was that most of the people in that graveyard were fairly homogeneous, genetically speaking. So you can see everybody in this triangle over here, they're clustering together, which means they're very closely linked together genetically. But there was one individual who was an outlier, who was not genetically related to those individuals. So what this study did was they then analyzed samples from nearby regions, and they tried to find out where exactly did this one outlier sample come from. And analyzing samples from Iran, like an excavation sites from Iran, this showed, and this outlier over here is highlighted over here, is that this one individual likely originated from modern-day Iran. And this individual is more similar to Iranians as he is to individuals identified in the northern Israel graveyard. So what do these results mean? These results likely mean that this one particular individual was likely either traveled or was transported all the way from modern-day Iran-Afghanistan region to the Israel region. And this was done about 3,500 years ago. So these results show that there was significant movement within this region, the South Central Asia, and then 1,000 years later, rather 1,500 years later, Hazrat Isa would take the exact same journey in the opposite direction, starting from modern-day Israel-Palestine all the way towards Iran, Afghanistan, and then towards Kashmir. So within our key takeaways, we can add one more, which is that this analysis of historical genetic outliers can tell us about movements of people. And if we're able to identify more samples from excavation sites, we can create a more fine-grained map of how Hazrat Isa moved, and Hazrat Isa, as well as the lost tribes of Israel, moved towards the east 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. And with that, Jazakallah for your attention.